It was the kind of heat that could dry a man's soul, the kind that turned the Texas wind into a furnace, carrying the smell of dust, sweat, and hopelessness. In a forgotten warehouse on the edge of Galveston, a crowd gathered for what they called an auction. But anyone with a beating heart knew it was something darker, a market for the desperate. Families ruined by drought were selling their children, and buyers, dressed like respectable citizens, were bidding for help. The room buzzed with murmurs and the clink of coins. The air was thick with flies and shame. And that's when Samuel McKinnon saw her. A small Apache girl, no older than 13, stood at the front with her wrists bound by a rope so rough it had carved thin red lines into her skin. Her dark hair hung in tangles, half covering a face that refused to show fear. Her eyes, deep, black, and steady, didn't belong to a child. They belonged to someone who had seen death and lived through it. The auctioneer's voice cracked through the heat. Next up, half-breed girl, strong and quick. Knows horses, tracks signs, even shoots a bow. Don't talk much, but she understands English enough to follow orders. The crowd chuckled. Someone spat. Another man muttered, "A savage ain't worth feedin'." Samuel adjusted his hat, jaw tightening. He'd fought in the frontier wars once, long before he'd become a rancher. He'd seen what men did to Apache women and children. He told himself he wasn't here to get involved, only to find help for his dying ranch. But something in that girl's eyes stopped him cold. When the auctioneer shouted, "Bidding starts at $20, Samuel's chest burned like whiskey. "25, shouted a short man with greasy hands. "30, came another voice, sharp and mean. Samuel recognized him. Tom Briggs, a cotton farmer north of town, the kind of man who worked his help to the bone and buried them behind the barn when they broke. 35, Briggs barked, smirking. Samuel stepped forward before his mind could stop him. His voice came out steady, cold. $50. The room went silent. Heads turned. 50 was too much, more than anyone paid for a child laborer, let alone an Apache girl. The auctioneer blinked, then grinned, smelling money. $50, ladies and gents. Do I hear 60? No one dared. Everyone knew Samuel McKinnon, tall, broad-shouldered, a man whose reputation stretched from Brazos County to Houston. His word was law on his land, and his temper, when provoked, was the kind that left silence behind. The hammer fell with a thud. Sold to Mr. McKinnon. The girl didn't flinch, didn't even blink. She looked at Samuel, not with fear, not with gratitude, but with something stranger. Pity. That look stayed with him long after the crowd began to thin. Outside, the sun had already begun to sink, painting the horizon in blood and copper. Samuel walked her toward his wagon. The girl's bare feet raised tiny clouds of dust with each step. He stopped beside the horses, untied her hands, and handed her a canteen. Drink. You'll need it for the road. She stared at the water for a moment before taking it. Her lips were cracked, her hands small but strong. What's your name, girl? She hesitated, then spoke softly, her accent lilting, melodic. Naya. Means what? He asked. She looked at him then, her gaze sharp as an arrowhead. It means the morning light. Samuel nodded slowly. Well, Naya, I'm Samuel McKinnon. You'll be working for me at my ranch. You'll have food, a bed, and no one will lay a hand on you. Her expression didn't change. You say that like I'm supposed to believe you. He sighed. You don't have to. Just live long enough to see if I'm telling the truth. The wagon rattled out of Galveston at dusk, wheels crunching over dry soil. The road stretched endless under a bruised purple sky. Crickets sang. The smell of sagebrush hung in the air. Naya sat beside him, silent but alert, eyes tracing every turn of the road, every fence line, every bend in the creek. After an hour, Samuel finally said, "You planning to run?" "Depends," she said without looking at him. "On what?" "On whether you bought me for work or for something worse." Samuel pulled the reins, stopping the wagon dead in the middle of the road. He turned to her fully. "Listen close, girl. I bought you because I needed help, not because I'm a monster. Any man who'd harm a child deserves a rope around his neck, and I'd put it there myself." For a long moment, she studied him. The tension eased in her shoulders. Then, barely audible, she said, "All right then." The wagon rolled on. They rode for miles through open prairie, through lands that once belonged to Naya's people. She watched the horizon in silence, her fingers brushing the edge of the seat as if feeling the heartbeat of the earth itself. Samuel caught her looking west. "You miss your tribe?" She didn't answer at first. Then, quietly, "My mother was taken when soldiers came. My father died before winter. I was the only one they didn't shoot." Her tone was flat, almost too calm. Samuel swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," he said. She glanced at him, eyes softening for the first time. "You didn't do it." By midnight, they reached the edge of Brazos County, where Samuel's ranch sprawled across the valley. Under the moonlight, fences gleamed silver, and the lowing of cattle echoed like distant thunder. The main house stood tall and proud despite the years. Lanterns flickered on the porch. A woman stepped into the light. Martha McKinnon, Samuel's wife. Her dress fluttered in the warm wind, and even from the wagon, Naya could see the tiredness in her eyes, the kind that comes from 15 years of hope turned to dust. Samuel helped Naya down. "Martha, this here's Naya. She'll be helping around the house." Martha's brow creased at the sight of the ragged child. "Good Lord, Samuel. She looks half-starved." "Probably is." Martha came closer, her voice softening. "Come inside, dear. Let's get you fed." For a heartbeat, Naya froze, the word dear hitting her like a forgotten melody. Then she followed the woman into the warm glow of the house. The kitchen smelled of bread and coffee. Naya sat quietly at the table, hands in her lap. Martha placed a bowl of stew before her, steam rising. "Eat," Martha said gently. "No one's taken it from you." Naya hesitated, then picked up the spoon. Slowly at first, then faster. The hunger was feral, unstoppable. Samuel leaned against the doorframe, watching. His wife looked at him, whispering, "Where did you find her?" "Galveston," he said. "Auction house." Martha's face hardened. Dear God. Samuel nodded grimly. "She's Apache." Martha looked back at the girl, the way she ate quietly, without a sound, eyes darting between spoonfuls as if ready to defend the bowl. Something twisted in her chest. "She's just a child," Martha whispered. "No child should look that old." That night, Samuel lay awake, listening to the sounds of the house, the creak of the rafters, the restless wind, and the faint, steady breathing from the small room off the kitchen. He couldn't shake the image of her eyes at the auction, not afraid, not pleading, just proud, defiant, and ancient. He thought about the drought, about the dying herd, about Martha's silent grief for the children they'd never had. Maybe, just maybe, that $50 girl wasn't a burden. Maybe she was a chance, a spark in the ashes, a morning light, just as her name said. The road west of Galveston stretched like a scar through the heart of Texas. long, lonely, and silent except for the creak of wood and the rhythmic clop of hooves. Samuel McKinnon held the reins loosely, the leather warm against his calloused hands. Beside him sat the Apache girl, Naya, as she'd said. The morning light. She hadn't spoken a word since they left the city. Her eyes were always moving, scanning the horizon, the fences, the sky. Like a wild thing that knew cages came in all shapes, even wagons. Samuel cleared his throat, hoping to cut through the quiet. "You ridden in a wagon before?" No answer. The wind caught a strand of her black hair and whipped it across her face, but she didn't brush it away. She just kept watching the road ahead. "You got folks anywhere?" he asked. Still nothing. He sighed, glancing sideways at her. She was small, barely more than a child, but there was steel in her posture, a pride that came from something deeper than age. "Look, Naya," he said, voice softening. "I meant what I said back there. You'll have a place to sleep, food on your plate, and no one's gonna hurt you." Her reply came quiet but sharp, like a knife slipped under skin. "White men always say that. Then they take everything." The words hit him harder than he expected. For a moment, Samuel couldn't find anything to say. The wind howled through the mesquite trees, and a hawk circled high above them, its shadow sliding across the road. "You're not wrong," he said finally. "Plenty of men took things they had no right to, but I ain't one of them." Naya turned her head just enough for him to see the faintest flicker in her eyes. Doubt, not belief, but something close to curiosity. Hours passed. The sun sank low, setting the land on fire with color. The prairie turned gold, then copper, then a dusky purple. Samuel whistled low. "You see that ridge up ahead? That's Brazos County. My land starts on the far side." Naya didn't answer, but her gaze lingered on the hills, where the horizon rippled like heat over water. "How big's your land?" she asked finally. Samuel smiled faintly. "Bigger than most men know what to do with. But it ain't worth a damn if the rain don't come." She tilted her head. "So why do you stay?" He blinked, surprised by the question. "Because it's mine. Because I built it with my own hands. Because it's the only place that feels like home." Naya looked back at the fading sun. "Home isn't what you build," she murmured. "It's what you don't lose." Samuel's chest tightened. He didn't know what to say to that. Night fell hard and sudden, the way it does in the open country. The air turned cool, scented with dust and sage. Samuel lit a lantern, its glow spilling across the wagon like melted gold. Naya shifted, finally pulling her knees up under her chin. "You fought in the wars, didn't you?" she asked out of nowhere. Samuel blinked, caught off guard. "How'd you figure that?" "Your eyes," she said simply. "They look like they've seen fire." He huffed a laugh, not quite humor, not quite sadness. "Yeah, I fought, long time ago. Thought I was doing the right thing back then. Against who?" He hesitated, then answered honestly. "Your people." Silence. Even the crickets seemed to stop. Finally, Naya said, "Then maybe we both got ghosts in this wagon." Samuel looked at her profile in the lantern light, the sharp line of her cheekbone, the smudge of dirt on her skin, the steady calm of her breath. He felt the weight of her words settle deep in his gut. "Maybe so," he said. "But I reckon ghosts can share a ride if they want the same thing." "What thing?" "Peace." She didn't reply, but she didn't turn away either. By dawn, the land began to change. Rolling grass gave way to open plains, dotted with oak and pecan. A thin ribbon of river glinted in the distance. Samuel pointed with the reins. "That's the Brazos. We'll cross it before noon." Naya's eyes followed the river as it shimmered under the morning sun. "It looks alive," she whispered. "It is," he said. "Everything worth keepin' is." When they stopped to water the horses, Naya climbed down, bare feet touching the dirt as if testing whether the land would accept her. She knelt by the riverbank, cupping water into her palms, and whispered something in Apache, soft, rhythmic, almost a prayer. Samuel watched from the wagon, curious but respectful. When she stood, he asked, "What was that?" She met his gaze, the morning light painting her face in bronze. "I told the river thank you," she said, "for letting me live another day." Samuel nodded slowly. "That's a good habit. Maybe I ought to start." She almost smiled. Almost. They rode in silence again until the afternoon, when the outline of McKinnon Ranch rose from the valley below. It was a proud spread. White fences, red barns, the main house perched on a small rise overlooking the fields. Even from a distance, Naya could see the life pulsing there, cattle grazing, smoke curling from chimneys, a few ranch hands moving like shadows through the dust. Her voice softened. "It's big." "Took me 20 years, Samuel said, pride and weariness mixing in his tone. "Started with 6 cows and a busted fence. Built the rest with sweat and stubbornness." Naya nodded slowly. "My people used to say the land doesn't belong to you. You belong to the land." Samuel glanced at her. "Then I guess the land and I are married." She didn't laugh, but the corner of her mouth twitched, the closest thing to humor he'd seen from her. When the wagon reached the porch, Martha McKinnon was already waiting. She stepped out, her dress catching the light like faded lilac. "Samuel," she called, relief in her voice. "I was starting to think you weren't coming back." "Had some business in town," he replied, climbing down. Then he turned to help Naya off the wagon. "This here's Naya," he said gently. "She'll be staying with us a while." Martha's smile faltered as she took in the girl's worn clothes, sunburnt skin, and wary posture. "Lord above," she whispered. "She's just a child." Naya straightened, chin lifting. "I work like a grown one." Martha blinked, then nodded slowly. "Well, we'll see about that. Come inside, sweetheart. Let's get you fed." Naya hesitated, the word sweetheart striking something she didn't recognize. But she followed. As they crossed the threshold, the cool air of the house wrapped around her like a memory she didn't know she had. The smell of bread, the creak of old wood, the hum of safety. Later, as Samuel unhitched the horses, he caught himself watching through the window. Naya sat at the kitchen table, shoulders tense, spoon in hand. Martha was talking softly, smiling the way she hadn't in years. The girl ate like someone who didn't quite believe in tomorrow, and Samuel, standing alone in the golden light of his yard, realized something he hadn't felt since his war days, the fragile, aching pull of hope. He looked toward the horizon, where the sun burned low and fierce. "Morning light," he murmured. "Guess that name suits her after all." When Samuel McKinnon brought the Apache girl home, his wife Martha didn't say a word at first. She just stood on the porch, hands folded over her apron, eyes tracing the small, dark figure that stepped down from the wagon like a stray coyote, unsure if the trap was still set. Martha had seen plenty of rough things in her life: storms, droughts, the empty cradle at the foot of her bed. But she'd never seen a child quite like this one. There was wildness in the girl's stance, and pride, too. Something untamed that didn't fit the white fences and polished floors of the McKinnon Ranch. That first night, Naya barely touched her supper. She ate quietly, every movement measured, every sound studied, as if she expected the meal to be snatched away. Martha noticed. She always noticed. When she took the girl upstairs to show her the small room overlooking the barn, Naya stopped at the window. The moonlight poured in, silvering the wooden floor. "So much space," she whispered. Martha smiled faintly. "It's home." Naya's gaze didn't leave the dark fields beyond. "For you," she said softly. The ranch hands talked. They always did. Some called her the savage girl. Others said Samuel had gone soft. But Samuel didn't care. Within a week, Naya proved she was more capable than any of them. She rose before dawn, carried feed, and tended to the horses like she'd been born in a stable. But there was one gelding she favored, a chestnut with a scar down his flank. The horse had been spooked by lightning months before and hadn't let anyone near him since. Samuel watched from the fence as Naya approached him one morning. She didn't carry a rope, didn't make a sound. She just stood close enough for the horse to smell her, whispering words Samuel didn't understand. Soft syllables in the Apache tongue that rolled like wind through grass. Minutes passed. Then, slowly, the horse lowered his head. Naya reached out, touched his neck, and began cleaning the wound with a wet rag. Martha, standing beside her husband, whispered, "She's talking to him." Samuel nodded. "And he's listening." When the horse finally let Naya brush his coat without flinching, Samuel felt something shift inside him. A quiet awe, like watching the first green shoot after a long winter. Martha was cautious at first. She didn't quite know what to do with this girl who spoke little and watched everything. But one evening, as the wind rattled the windows and the lamps flickered low, Naya sat by the hearth and began humming. It wasn't a tune Martha knew. It was older, slower, something that felt like the sound of earth breathing. "What's that song?" Martha asked. Naya shrugged. "My mother used to sing it to the rain." Martha hesitated, then said, "Would you teach it to me?" Naya looked up in surprise. "You would want to learn?" "I'd like to," Martha said softly. "Maybe it'll bring rain again." From that night on, the two of them began to build something fragile and new, a bridge of quiet gestures and borrowed words. Martha taught Naya to read from the family Bible, tracing letters with her finger on the worn pages. Naya, in return, taught Martha how to read the land, the way the wind changed before a storm, how ants moved higher on the fence posts when rain was near, how to listen for thunder long before it arrived. One afternoon, Martha found her in the garden, barefoot, palm pressed against the dirt. "What are you doing, honey?" Naya didn't look up. "The ground's talking," she said simply. "It's saying it's thirsty." That night, Martha caught herself standing on the porch, sniffing the air like the girl did, listening. Samuel noticed the change long before he said anything. The house no longer felt heavy. Martha laughed again. Real laughter, not the brittle kind that used to echo off empty walls. And Naya was learning faster than he could teach her. She helped him tally the cattle, measured grain, and even spotted signs of fever in the herd before the foreman did. One morning, while checking the grazing lands, Samuel found her crouched beside a sick steer. "You can smell it," she said when he approached. "The sickness, it's in the grass." He frowned. "In the grass?" she pointed. "See how it bends different? Smells sweet when it shouldn't. They ate too much of that." Samuel tested it himself, and damned if she wasn't right. He studied her then, not as a stray girl, but as something rarer. A mind as sharp as flint, a spirit built from fire and dust. "You ever think about learning ranch work proper?" he asked. She glanced up, eyes narrowing. "I thought that's what I've been doing." Samuel chuckled. Fair enough. That winter came hard. Frost laced the fences, and the nights stretched long. But inside the McKinnon house, there was warmth that hadn't lived there in years. Martha began sewing again. Quilts, curtains, small things to brighten the rooms. She even taught Naya to thread a needle and mend shirts. The first time Naya pricked her finger, Martha took her hand and kissed the tiny drop of blood away without thinking. Naya stared at her, stunned. "Why'd you do that?" Martha smiled. "Because that's what mothers do." The word mother hung in the air between them like smoke. Neither spoke again for a long while, but from that moment, something unspoken changed. Naya started leaving small gifts around the house: feathers, stones, pressed wildflowers. She said they kept bad spirits away. Martha never questioned it. And Samuel, coming in from the fields one evening, paused in the doorway as he watched them. His wife and the Apache girl laughing softly over a burned pie. He couldn't remember the last time he'd heard laughter in that kitchen. "Guess she's got a way of bringing light where it don't belong," he muttered. Martha turned, smiling. "Maybe it always belonged, Sam. We just forgot how to let it in." Weeks turned into months. The ranch began to thrive again. Naya's keen sense of weather saved them from losing cattle to a late storm. Her calm steadiness steadied everyone else. Sometimes, at dusk, Samuel would find her sitting on the fence, hair blowing wild in the wind, humming that same rain song. He'd stand beside her, hat in hand, and the silence between them would feel less like distance and more like understanding. One evening, he asked, "You ever think you'll go back to your people?" She was quiet a long time. Then she said, "Maybe the land will take me back someday, but not yet." Samuel nodded. "You're welcome to stay as long as you like. Ain't no chains on this place." Naya smiled faintly. "Then maybe I'll stay till the morning light runs out." That night, Martha wrote in her journal, "The house used to feel hollow. Now it feels alive again. Naya doesn't just work here, she breathes here. She's taught me that sometimes love doesn't come the way you expect. It just arrives, quiet as dawn. The wind came first, a long, low moan rolling out of the desert, thick with sand and cold. By sundown, the sky had turned the color of rust, and dust swirled like ghosts through the ranch yard. Inside the kitchen, Naya worked quietly by the lantern light. She'd learned to move through the house like the wind, silent, unseen, but always there. Her hands were busy kneading bread, her hair tied back with a strip of rawhide. Then the door creaked. Jake Winters, the new ranch hand, leaned against the frame, half drunk and grinning like a man who'd never known boundaries. His boots scraped across the wood floor, and the smell of cheap whiskey filled the room. "Evening, pretty girl," he slurred. "You work too hard. A man could help you loosen up some." Naya froze, the muscles in her arms tightening. "You should leave," she said without looking up. Her voice was calm, but her eyes had gone dark as a storm sky. Jake chuckled. "Don't be shy now. Ain't no harm in—" The rest of his words never made it out. The cast iron skillet struck him square in the temple with a crack that echoed through the kitchen. He staggered backward, hand clutching the side of his head. Blood streaked down his face. "You little wildcat!" he roared, stumbling forward. Naya raised the skillet again. "The next time, I don't miss." That was when Samuel McKinnon appeared in the doorway, shotgun in hand, eyes blazing. "Jake," he said, voice low and cold, "you've got exactly 10 minutes to pack your gear and get the hell off my land." Jake blinked, swaying. "Mr. McKinnon, sir, she—" "Don't." The single word carried the weight of a hanging rope. "It's storming out there," Jake shouted, desperate now. Samuel took one step closer. Then you'd better start walking before the lightning helps me see where to aim. Jake looked from Samuel to Naya, saw no mercy in either face, then spat blood on the floor and stumbled out into the night. The door slammed behind him, and the sound of hooves faded into the wind. Martha came running moments later, wrapping a shawl tight around her shoulders. "What happened?" she cried. Samuel nodded toward the girl, who was standing silent, the skillet still in her hands. "Jake won't be bothering anyone again." Martha's face paled as she took in the blood spatter, the trembling in Naya's fingers. She stepped forward slowly. "Sweetheart, you're safe now." But Naya's eyes stayed fixed on the door, her chest rising and falling like a cornered animal's. "He'll tell them," she whispered. Samuel frowned. "Tell who?" Naya looked at him then, really looked, and something inside her broke loose. "You should know who I am, before they come." They moved to the parlor, where the fire snapped and spit against the wind. Naya sat near the hearth, shadows flickering across her face. Martha poured coffee, though none of them touched it. Finally, the girl began to speak. "Before you found me at the auction, I was in Galveston. I worked for a man named Garrett Mills." The name made Samuel's stomach turn. He knew that name. Everyone in Texas did. Mills ran half the criminal trade along the Gulf, smuggling horses, whiskey, guns, and people. "I was never his property," Naya said, her voice flat. "But he kept me close, said an Apache girl who could read numbers was useful." Samuel's brow furrowed. "Numbers?" "He had me watch his ledgers, count shipments, record payments to the men who kept him safe. Lawmen, judges, soldiers. When the raids came, I was the one who warned him first." Martha's hand flew to her mouth. "Dear Lord." "When I ran," Naya continued, "I took one of his books, the small one. It has names, amounts. I thought maybe, if he ever came for me, it could save me." Her eyes lifted to Samuel's. "That's why Jake's not the last one you'll see." The wind howled against the windows like the cry of a coyote. Samuel leaned forward. "You have that book here?" Naya nodded slowly. "Sewn into the lining of my old dress. The one from the auction." Martha stood abruptly, pale as the curtains behind her. "Samuel, we're harboring a witness, a child caught up in a murderer's business. If Mills finds out..." "He already knows," Naya said quietly. "Men like him always know." For a long while, none of them spoke. The only sound was the storm hammering the roof and the ticking of the mantel clock. Finally, Samuel stood. "You listen to me, both of you. That man may run half of Galveston, but this is Brazos County. My land, my rules. No one lays a finger on anyone under this roof." Martha looked up at him, tears welling. "Samuel, you can't fight a man like Garrett Mills." Samuel's jaw clenched. "I've fought worse." Then he turned to Naya. "You hear me, girl? You're not running again. You stay right here where you belong." Her voice trembled. "You don't owe me that." He met her eyes, hard, steady, kind. "No, but I owe it to myself to do something right before this life's done." That night, the storm raged until dawn. The wind tore at the shutters and filled the house with the sound of an army marching through sand. But inside, the three of them sat close to the fire, bound together not by blood, but by a shared resolve. When the thunder faded, Martha brought out a needle and thread. "If that ledger's really in your dress," she said softly, "let's move it somewhere safer." Naya hesitated, then handed her the bundle of worn fabric. Together they worked at the seams until a small leather-bound book slid free. Its cover was stained, its pages smudged, but the names were clear. Lists of payments, initials, dates. Samuel flipped through the pages, whistling low. Sweet mercy, he's bought half the county. Naya nodded. That's why he'll never stop. Samuel looked at her, something fierce sparking in his chest. Then maybe it's time someone made him. Martha reached out, taking both their hands. If we're doing this, she said, we do it together. Outside, the first light of morning broke through the clouds, washing the land in gold and silver. The storm was gone, but the air still smelled of iron and wet earth, like the breath of something newly born. Samuel stepped onto the porch, shotgun slung across his shoulder, and watched the horizon. Behind him, Naya appeared, barefoot, hair tangled by sleep. She looked small against the endless Texas sky, but her eyes burned steady. He'll come, she said. Samuel nodded. Let him. He glanced down at her and almost smiled. Ain't the first outlaw I've dealt with. Won't be the last. Naya's lips curved into a faint, knowing grin. You don't understand, Samuel. This time he's not just after me. He turned to face her fully. Then who? Her gaze drifted toward the road cutting across the valley. Dust rose there, faint, distant, but moving fast. Everyone who stands between him and that book, she said. The wind shifted again, carrying the promise of another storm, not of sand, but of men. And Samuel McKinnon, for the first time in years, felt ready for it. The night before the attack was too still, too quiet. The kind of quiet that made the horses restless and the dogs refuse to bark. Samuel McKinnon had felt it in his bones all day, that heavy stillness pressing down on the land. The wind had died. Even the cicadas had gone silent. He sat by the window with his rifle across his knees, listening to the tick of the mantel clock and the low hum of the lamp. Martha had gone to bed hours ago. Naya was in her small room off the kitchen, but Samuel knew she wasn't sleeping. The girl never slept deep. Not since she'd told them the truth about Garrett Mills. 3 nights had passed since Jake Winters rode out into the storm, and the wind had carried whispers since. Men in town asking questions, strangers seen on the old Brazos Trail. And now, the quiet. It came just before dawn, a faint, rhythmic thunder rolling through the valley. Naya was the first to hear it. She shot up in bed, heart hammering. She moved to the window, pushing aside the curtain just enough to see. 6 riders. No mistaking their purpose. They moved fast, spread out, guns glinting faintly in the half-light. Samuel, she hissed, running for the stairs. Riders, coming fast! Within seconds, Samuel was on his feet, rifle in hand. Martha appeared behind him in her robe, pale but steady. How many? He asked. 6 that I saw, Naya said, voice tight. Jake's one of them. Samuel cursed under his breath. Wake the hands in the bunkhouse. No time to lose. Naya grabbed the shotgun from the kitchen wall and checked the chamber like she'd done it 1,000 times. Samuel caught the movement, a flicker of pride mixing with fear. You stay in the back, he ordered. If they break through, you shoot. Don't hesitate. I won't, she said simply. Outside, the hoofbeats grew louder. Then came Jake's voice, rough and ugly, carried on the cold morning air. McKinnon, send out the girl and nobody gets hurt. Samuel leaned out the front window, rifle ready. You're trespassing, Jake. Turn around before you do something stupid. Jake laughed. You're harboring a thief. Mills just wants what's his. He's got nothing here, Samuel shouted back. The answer came in gunfire. The first shot shattered the front window, spraying glass across the parlor. Martha ducked, clutching the cross around her neck. Samuel fired back, the blast echoing through the valley like a thunderclap. Out back, Naya crouched by the kitchen door, breath steady, shotgun aimed. She saw movement, a shadow slipping along the side of the barn. Another man climbed onto the porch, trying to pry the window open. She waited until she could see his face, then pulled the trigger. The blast threw him backward into the dirt. Smoke filled the air, bitter and thick. Naya reloaded with quick, sure hands. Through the haze, she could hear the others shouting orders, the crack of rifles from the barn where the ranch hands had taken up defense. The smell of gunpowder mingled with dust and sweat. Samuel fired again from the front room, hitting one of the riders trying to circle toward the corral. "They're pushing from both sides," he yelled. "I got the back," Naya called. Martha crawled toward the pantry, pulling open a drawer to hand out more shells. Her fingers trembled, but her voice didn't. "Here, Naya, keep 'em coming." "Yes, ma'am," Naya said. And for the first time, Martha realized the girl was smiling, calm, determined, alive. After what felt like hours, though it was hardly 20 minutes, the gunfire slowed. The riders regrouped behind the water trough, crouched low. Then Jake's voice came again. "McKinnon, I'm coming in under a white flag. Let's talk." Samuel hesitated. Martha's eyes widened. "It's a trick," she whispered. "Maybe," Samuel said. "But if it buys us a minute, I'll take it." He stepped out onto the porch, rifle still in hand. Naya followed, shotgun lowered but ready. Jake rode forward a few paces, his horse snorting and pawing the ground. His face was pale under the morning light, a thin bandage still wrapped around the spot where Naya had hit him days before. "You got guts, old man," he said, "but you're outnumbered. Mills don't want you. He just wants the book." Samuel spat into the dirt. "Ain't yours to take." Jake's grin was all teeth. "You think he'll stop here? He'll burn this place to ash, Sam. You, your wife, your precious little Indian girl, all of it." That's when Naya stepped forward. Her voice cut through the smoke like steel. "What if you didn't have to?" Jake looked down at her, startled. "What's that mean?" "You want the book? Fine, take it. But you tell Mills the Apache girl's dead? You tell him you burned her yourself? Then you never come back." Jake laughed, but there was a nervous edge to it. "He ain't gonna buy that." "He will if you show him proof," Naya said. She raised her hand, and with the same calm she'd shown in the fight, she pulled out her old dress, the one from the auction, still folded neatly in a drawer. She took her knife, sliced a clean cut across her palm, and pressed the wound to the fabric until the blood bloomed dark red. "Take this," she said, holding it out. "Tell him I fought, and you killed me. That's all he needs." Jake stared at her, torn between greed and disbelief. "You serious?" Samuel growled. "You don't deserve her mercy, boy, but you take that and ride. Now." Jake hesitated only a second longer, then snatched the cloth, signaling to his men. Within minutes, the riders were pulling away, their silhouettes swallowed by the sunrise. When the last echo of hooves faded, Samuel lowered his rifle. The sun had climbed over the hills, turning the battlefield gold. The yard was scarred, bullet holes in the walls, blood in the dirt. But the ranch still stood. Martha stepped outside, shawl wrapped tight. Her eyes found Naya first. The girl was pale, blood dripping from her hand, but her chin was high. "You're hurt," Martha gasped. "Just a scratch," Naya said softly. Samuel walked up beside her, laying a heavy hand on her shoulder. "You saved this place," he said. "You saved us." She looked up at him, expression unreadable. "You saved me first." He shook his head. "No, girl. You did that all on your own. That evening, When the sun dipped low and the air smelled of ash and victory, the three of them sat by the fire. The house was quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet as before. This was peace, the kind that comes after a fight that mattered. Samuel cleaned his rifle in silence. Martha stitched Naya's palm, hands gentle but sure. "You didn't have to bleed for us," Martha whispered. Naya smiled faintly. "Blood means life. Now he'll stop looking for mine." Samuel looked into the flames, his voice low. "If the devil himself rides up that road again, he'll find more than he bargained for." Martha glanced at him. "You mean us?" Samuel nodded. "Us, and that little Apache firebrand who just outsmarted half of Galveston." Naya chuckled quietly, eyes reflecting the glow of the fire. Outside, the coyotes began to sing, and the wind carried the sound across the valley like a hymn. For the first time since he could remember, Samuel McKinnon felt something he hadn't dared to in years. Faith. Faith in the land, faith in the woman beside him, and faith in the small, fierce girl who had brought light to their house, and proved that sometimes salvation rode in on bare feet and a heartbeat of courage. The land was quiet again. A week after the gunfire faded, the McKinnon ranch looked almost untouched, if you didn't count the bullet holes in the porch rail or the patched windows. The cattle had returned to grazing, the dogs to sleeping in the shade, and the Texas wind carried only the smell of mesquite and sun-warmed dust. But inside the house, something had changed. The three people who sat around the breakfast table that morning were no longer the same as they'd been before the fight. Martha poured coffee with steady hands, her hair tied back in a braid that hadn't seen dust in days. Samuel sat at the head of the table, quiet as always, but his eyes lingered longer on the girl across from him, the Apache girl who had faced armed men and saved his home. Naya ate in silence, her bandaged hand resting beside her plate. The light from the window fell across her face, softening the sharpness that hardship had carved there. For the first time since she'd arrived, the air between them felt easy. That evening, when the chores were done and the sun dipped low over the hills, Samuel leaned against the porch railing, pipe in hand. Martha joined him, wrapping her shawl tighter against the wind. They watched Naya walking along the fence line, her long shadow stretching across the golden fields. The horses followed her, ears pricked, as if they understood every word of the soft Apache tune she hummed. Martha's voice was gentle. "She's not just a guest anymore, Sam." Samuel nodded. "No, she's ours, whether the law says so or not." Martha hesitated, then said, "Then let's make it right. Let's make it official." Samuel turned to her, brow furrowed. "You know the law. They don't take kindly to white folks adopting an Apache child." "Then we'll make them," she said simply. "Or we'll do it without their permission." He smiled, that slow, tired smile that always made her remember the man she'd fallen in love with 20 years ago. "You always did have more fight in you than sense?" She reached for his hand. "And you always did need someone to remind you when to follow your heart." They rode into town 2 days later, dressed in their Sunday best. The people of Brazos looked up as they passed. Samuel, the respected rancher, and beside him the dark-haired girl sitting proud on her horse. The clerk at the courthouse frowned when he saw them. "You can't be serious, Mr. McKinnon. The law don't allow it. Not for an Indian child." Samuel's voice was calm but firm. "You're looking at a child who saved my wife's life, my ranch, and my men. She's family now. Paper or no paper?" The clerk shifted uneasily under his gaze. "I can file it as a ward of the state, maybe. It ain't proper adoption, but it'll keep her name with yours." Samuel nodded once. "Do it." When it was done, Martha took Naya's hand and whispered, "Welcome home, daughter of the wind." Naya blinked fast, as if holding back tears. "Why that name?" "Because," Martha said, smiling, "you came here like the wind, wild, untamed, and exactly what we needed." From that day forward, Samuel began to teach Naya everything he knew about ranching: how to read a map, measure the lay of the land, count heads of cattle by trail dust alone. He'd spread old survey charts across the kitchen table, tracing rivers and fence lines with a calloused finger. "This here's the north pasture. You can tell how much rain she's had by the color of the grass. Greener near the creek means the water runs steady. You watch that. It'll tell you what the herd needs before they do." Naya listened intently, her sharp mind soaking up every detail. Soon she could read rainfall patterns better than the foreman and mark routes for drives through rough terrain. At night, under lamplight, Samuel made her practice her English handwriting, looping letters until her words were as sure as her aim with a shotgun. But she wasn't just learning, she was teaching too. When Martha sat with her in the evenings, Naya taught her Apache songs, slow, haunting melodies that spoke of horses and wind spirits, of the bond between land and soul. She told stories too, about the coyote who taught men to dream, about the great stallion who carried thunder in his hooves. Martha wrote them down in a small journal. On the cover, she carved the words, "Lessons from my daughter." As spring came, life returned to the ranch in full color. The rains were good that year. The grass grew high and thick, and the herd fattened. Samuel said it was luck, but Martha swore it was Naya's prayers to the spirits of the land. The ranch hands started calling her Miss Naya, half in jest, half in respect. When one of the colts broke its leg in the corral, it was Naya who calmed it enough for Samuel to set the bone. When a cow went missing in the hills, she was the one who found it by reading the broken twigs and faint hoof prints that no one else noticed. Samuel would shake his head and say, "Girl's got eyes sharper than an eagle," and Martha, watching from the porch, would whisper, "She's got a heart stronger than one too." One night, as the fire crackled and the scent of coffee filled the room, Naya sat at the piano bench, an old relic Martha kept, though she rarely played. Her fingers brushed the keys tentatively, forming soft, uncertain notes. Martha joined her, humming one of Naya's Apache tunes in perfect harmony. Samuel leaned against the doorframe, watching them, a slow warmth blooming in his chest. He remembered the day he'd first seen the girl in Galveston, a child with eyes full of defiance and sorrow. He never could have imagined this, her laughter filling his home, her songs blending with his wife's voice, the ghosts of his loneliness finally put to rest. When the music faded, he said quietly, "You know, Naya, you've done something no one else ever could." She looked up. "What's that?" "You made this house a home again." Her lips curved into a shy smile. "You and Martha made it a home. I just brought the wind back through the door." Months later, on a warm summer morning, Samuel hitched the wagon and called out, "You ready, daughter?" The word daughter rolled off his tongue naturally now, without hesitation or weight. Naya climbed up beside him, grinning under the brim of her hat. "Where we headed?" "Town fair. Thought you might like to show that new horse of yours." As the wagon rolled out, Martha waved from the porch. "Don't let her show you up, Sam," Samuel chuckled. "Wouldn't dare try." The road ahead shimmered in the heat, but for once, the world felt open, safe, like the kind of life you fought to keep. And as they rode side by side, the old rancher and the Apache girl who'd become his daughter, the wind carried their laughter across the Texas plains. That night, when Martha wrote her journal entry, she ended with one simple line. "We did not choose her by blood. We chose her by heart, And in that choice, we found our family again. 5 years had passed since the dawn when gunfire echoed through the Brazos Valley. The bullet holes in the porch had long been patched, but the memory of that night remained in the grain of the wood and the rhythm of the wind. What the storm had broken, love rebuilt. And what love rebuilt had become something greater than any of them had dreamed. It started with one lost boy. He was maybe 10, thin as wire, eyes too old for his face. Naya found him half dead near the creek one August afternoon, his hands blistered, his back striped with whip marks. He'd escaped from a traveling cattle outfit that worked its young drovers like mules. Samuel brought him home in the wagon. Martha fed him, washed him, sat beside his bed until he stopped shaking. Naya stayed at his side through the night, whispering songs in Apache, low, steady sounds that calmed the fever and kept him from drifting away. When the boy finally woke, his first words were, "You ain't gonna send me back, are you?" Naya smiled softly. "No, little one. You're home now." That night, while the cicadas sang in the trees, Samuel sat on the porch, thinking. Martha joined him, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. "That boy's got no place to go," Samuel said quietly. "Then we give him one," Martha replied. And from that moment, McKinnon Ranch became more than a ranch. It became a refuge. It started small, 2 children, then 4. By the next spring, there were 12, white, Mexican, Apache, and everything in between. Children no one wanted, children who had known only hunger and work and fear. They arrived in wagons, on foot, sometimes carried by Naya herself. She dug a new well by hand, with Samuel guiding the pulley and the older boys hauling stone. She built bunkhouses from old timber, sewed blankets from cast-off cloth, and taught the children how to ride and hunt. At sunrise, she'd stand before them in the yard, hair loose, face lit by the red Texas light, and say, "The land gives you what you give it. Treat it kind, and it will remember your name." By sundown, they'd be dusty and laughing, their hands full of tools, their bellies full of Martha's bread. It wasn't a school, not by the world's standards, but it was home. The children gave her a name, Sister of the Sky. They said it was because she moved like the wind and could calm a frightened horse with just a whisper. When the smallest ones woke, crying from bad dreams, Naya would sit beside them, telling stories about the great hawk that carried prayers to heaven, or the wolf who guided the lost back to their path. Samuel watched her with quiet pride. The little girl he'd once bought at an auction was now the heart of a family that stretched across color and blood. He called her daughter, but the children called her Sister of the Sky, and somehow both were true. The names came naturally. To the kids, Samuel was Papa Sam, the man who always had a word of wisdom, a joke, or a steady hand when a horse bucked or a fence line broke. And Martha became Mama Mar, the woman who made stew thick enough to feed an army and quilts warm enough to soften the hardest nightmares. They never set out to become parents again. It just happened. The ranch filled with laughter, wild, unrestrained laughter that drifted across the prairie like birdsong. There were moments of chaos, too. Fights over chores, tears when the younger ones fell, nights when thunder shook the walls, and the littlest crawled into Martha's bed for comfort. But in all of it, there was life. Real, messy, beautiful life. One summer afternoon, the older boys built a windmill by the barn. Samuel's idea, but Naya's design. It pumped water faster than any hand well they'd ever had. When they finished, Naya climbed to the top, hair whipping in the hot wind, and tied a faded piece of red cloth to the spindle. "That there's our flag," Samuel said, smiling up at her. "What's it stand for?" one of the boys asked. "For us," Naya called down. For every child who thought they were alone. The wind caught the fabric, and it flapped proudly against the wide blue sky. That flag stayed there for years, a mark of what the ranch had become, a home for the forgotten. Under Naya's care, the children learned more than chores. They learned how to live. She taught them to read the wind, to track animals without a gun, to ride bareback across the plains. Martha taught them how to write their names, sew a torn shirt, and pray in gratitude before every meal. Samuel taught them fairness, how a man's worth wasn't in his blood, but in his word. And at night, when the stars stretched endless above the valley, they'd sit around the fire and listen to Naya tell stories of the old ways. Not as myths, but as truths whispered by the earth. "The stars," she'd say, pointing upward, "are not far. They're just campfires from those who came before us." The children would sit, eyes wide, until sleep carried them away. Word of the ranch spread. Some folks in town mocked Samuel for collecting strays. Others came to see for themselves. The preacher, the sheriff, even a few widows who brought bread and stayed to help teach. When reporters from the Galveston Times rode in one dusty afternoon, Samuel nearly sent them packing. But Naya stopped him. "Let them see what we've built," she said. "Let the world know we're not broken." The next week, an article appeared. "The Ranch of Second Chances: How One Family Turned Dust into Hope." Donations trickled in. So did more children. By winter, the bunkhouses were full, and Naya was teaching 30 students under the big oak by the riverbank. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Samuel and Martha sat on the porch watching the children race across the field, their laughter rising like a hymn. Samuel's hands trembled slightly now, age creeping in. Martha leaned her head against his shoulder. "She did it, Sam," Martha whispered. "She gave them a life." He nodded slowly. "She gave us one too." Out by the windmill, Naya stood tall, her skirt whipping in the warm breeze, her voice carrying a soft song to the fading light. It was the same song she'd sung to the horses years ago, the same melody that had once filled an empty house and turned it into a home. The children gathered around her, one by one, until her voice blended with theirs, a chorus of every color, every story, every soul that had found its way there. Samuel looked out over the land, his land, and felt something deeper than pride, something like peace. "The daughter of the wind," he said quietly. "She was meant to bring us all home." By 1903, the McKinnon Ranch had become more than a piece of land. It was a legend whispered across Texas. Cattlemen spoke of it in saloons. School teachers told its story to wide-eyed children, and travelers passing through Brazos County swore they could feel something different in the air when the wind crossed that valley. Something alive, something good. They called it the McKinnon Miracle. Once a struggling ranch run by a quiet old man and his barren wife, it had become a sanctuary for the lost, the broken, and the forgotten. Children of every color and creed who had found a second life there. And at the heart of it all stood a woman named Rebecca Naya McKinnon, the Apache girl once sold for $50, now a teacher, leader, and the voice of a new kind of freedom. The morning of the ceremony dawned clear and bright. The Texas sun spilled gold across the wide fields, and the windmill's flag, the same tattered red cloth from years ago, fluttered proudly against the endless sky. Wagons lined the road, filled with visitors. Men in pressed suits and women in lace dresses stepped down, brushing dust from their hems. Reporters from Houston, Austin, and Dallas crowded the fence line, notebooks ready. And when the governor's carriage rolled through the gate, the children, now grown young men and women, stood shoulder to shoulder, singing a song Naya had taught them long ago. It was in Apache, soft and low, carrying the rhythm of wind and prayer. Samuel stood near the porch, leaning on his cane. Martha sat beside him in her rocking chair, her silver hair catching the light. They watched with quiet pride as Naya approached the small wooden stage at the center of the yard. She wore a long white dress with an Apache sash at her waist, half frontier, half native, entirely her own. When she stepped up to the podium, the crowd fell silent. Naya took a deep breath. Her voice when she spoke was steady and warm, the kind that carried through the air without needing to shout. 5 years ago, she began, this ranch was a home for 12 children. Today, it shelters more than 100, each one with a story, each one with a name worth remembering. She looked out over the sea of faces, pale, brown, freckled, sunburned, all united by something stronger than blood. They call this place a miracle. But I don't believe in miracles made by chance. I believe in work, in faith, in kindness that doesn't care what language you speak or the color of your skin. She paused, then smiled softly. When I was 13, I was sold at an auction in Galveston. I thought my life had ended, but a man named Samuel McKinnon bought me, not because he needed a servant, but because he still had mercy left in his heart. He and his wife, Martha, didn't just give me food and shelter. They gave me a name, an education, and a choice. The choice to live, not in bitterness, but in hope. Her eyes shone with quiet fire. The white man freed me from chains, but it was love, not law, that made me truly free. The crowd was silent. Even the wind seemed to stop and listen. Then Naya continued, switching to Apache for a few lines, her voice soft and melodic, like a prayer. In my mother's tongue, she explained, I said, we are all travelers under the same sky, none above, none below, only hearts walking home. She lifted her gaze toward the horizon. That's what this place is, a home. Not a perfect one, not a rich one, but one built on the simple truth that we don't choose where we come from. We choose what we build together. The crowd erupted in applause. After the ceremony, the governor presented her with a medal, the state's highest honor for humanitarian work. Naya accepted it with grace, but when the official offered to hang it around her neck, she shook her head. I'd rather it hang in the schoolhouse, she said. Let the children see what love can do when the law is too slow to catch up. The governor laughed softly, touched by her humility. Miss McKinnon, he said, you've done something this country's still learning to do. Bring people together. She smiled. Then let's keep teaching it, Governor. By evening, the crowd had gone. The lanterns were dimming, and the fields were quiet again, just as they had been all those years before. Samuel sat on the porch, the sound of frogs rising from the creek below. The cane leaned against his knee, and a cigar smoldered between his fingers. Naya walked up behind him, barefoot, her hair unbound. She stood there for a moment before sitting beside him. Neither spoke for a long while. The last light of sunset painted the world in amber and violet. Finally, Samuel broke the silence. You did good, girl. She smiled. I had good teachers. He chuckled softly, coughing once. When I paid that $50 for you in Galveston, I figured I was buying myself a handful of trouble. She tilted her head. Was I? He grinned. The best kind? Then his voice grew softer. You know, I used to think I was saving a child that day. Turns out I was saving myself. Naya reached for his hand. It was rough and cold, but still strong. You gave me a family, she said. Now you've got 100 more out there who call you Papa Sam. He looked out across the ranch, the bunkhouses, the lights glowing in the windows, the silhouettes of children laughing in the yard. $50, he murmured, shaking his head. That's what she cost me, and I reckon I got a whole generation's worth of salvation in return. When the moon rose, Naya saddled her horse, a gray mare named Windflower, and rode out across the open fields. The night air was cool, full of crickets and memory. She stopped at the ridge overlooking the valley, the same spot where Samuel had once shown her the borders of his land. Below, the ranch glowed like a constellation, each window a flicker of life. She whispered in Apache, "Mother Earth, Father Sky, thank you for bringing me home." A soft wind brushed against her cheek, almost like an answer, and for the first time in years, she felt that same sense of belonging she'd once only dreamed of, not as an outsider, not as an orphan, but as a part of something eternal. The papers would later write about her speech. They'd call it "The Day Texas Listened to the Wind." They'd say Rebecca Naya McKinnon was proof that compassion could bridge any border, that an Apache girl once sold for $50 had taught the state the meaning of freedom. But those who'd known her, Samuel, Martha, the children she'd raised, didn't need headlines. They had seen it with their own eyes. They had lived the miracle. As the story ends, the question drifts, carried by that same Texas wind. How much is a life worth? If one act of kindness can save a soul, a family, or perhaps an entire generation.